Wow, Jerry, I'm grateful for the same thing. I'm grateful to meet with this group too. I really love all of you. I love these times that we spend together talking about these topics. They're fantastic. Fuck you then. I've stopped counting new MEs, trying to figure out what is next. Keep up with the excellent work, Moneybag73. Shout out to Moneybags. Maybe it's Mandela. My son, grateful for her son, with 3 heart emojis. And that's, again, the we are grateful for, especially today.
You could say, this is the worst day I've ever had, but I got to have a bite of chocolate. Focus on the chocolate. It doesn't really matter. Find 3 things, 3 tiny things. You can write them down. You can tell them to your spouse. You can tell them to your cat. It doesn't really matter. When you do this, we can measure. Focus on the chocolate. It doesn't really matter. Find 3 things.
Absolute beginners came to Georgetown. They were wearing Harris tweed and pork pie hats. They'd slit your throat and throw you in the gutter. But it's all you can expect from men like that. The bus is bound for Niles Bend Harbor. The ladies wear perfume to scar your nose. And the only way to reach them is to scare them. But of that you know little, I suppose. It's a magical and mystical performance as you perambulate right down the road with your pockets full of stardust and perfection, and Jesus on your side and in your soul. She had rings on every finger and 10 bracelets, some touch with powers given by a sage. He had contemplated giving her his wristwatch. The time for him had long since gone its way. Of the city he would shuffle while spinning on his heels and chewing beef. He had promised her he'd be a vegetarian, but he could not control his lust for meat. Some say she left the streets for greater glory, but others said that she was big with child. Whatever was the truth, it did not matter. He would hunt her down and cut her with his smile. Last time he was seen was by the pawn shop. He traded 2 gold teeth for a sack of corn, and he would plant it on the outskirts of the city as a warning that he would someday return. He said he never found her, he's still looking. It is said he searches rivers for some sign, but the truth is that he caught her down in Georgetown with a Spaniard who had left his wife behind.
Don't you wish that your weekend was longer than just 2 days? Well, if so, then you're in luck, because here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio, our weekend begins on Wednesday. Yes, you heard that right. Our weekend kicks off every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, with Darkwolf's Den, starring yours truly, Jerry the Dark Wolf. But that's where the fun has only just begun. Make sure you come back every Thursday through Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, for the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show. starring AJ the Rippin' Rabbit. He dives into the archives of vocal legend Art Bell and brings those stories up to date. So make sure that you spend your extended weekends with the animals of radio, Jerry the Dark Wolf and AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, every Wednesday through Sunday, right here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
Rippin' Rabbit Hole is a community-driven radio. At times the community comments may reveal prejudices and other beliefs that we or our sponsors do not condone. Views or opinions expressed by the community, callers, or guests, are those of the individual speaking and do not represent the views or opinions of this site. Rippin' Common Sense content is intended for mature audiences only. Enjoy.
As we all know, most, if not all, of the rabbit holes are connected. Every now and then, though, you come to a crossroads where a lot of them meet. This particular crossroads happens to be the single most important series of experiments to ever be done within the field of paranormal research, proving without the shadow of a doubt from the skeptics involved that the paranormal exists. Don't believe me? Perhaps by the end of the show, you will be just a little more open-minded to the magic of reality. Welcome to the Scole experiments.
Coming to you from a secret mountain cave, hidden deep within the Idaho wilderness. This is the DarkWolf's Den Show. Now, here is your host, Jerry Hicks.
That's right, I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf, and this is the DarkWolf's Den Show. Welcome everybody, whether you're on the edge of reality, the edge of the galaxy, or the edge of your seat, we appreciate you having us right there with you. Before we get started tonight, we do have a couple of announcements. First up, if you haven't heard already, the International Mandela Effect Conference for 2020 is coming up. That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, June 20th to the 26th, they're going to do this. Check this out. Absolutely free. Online to anybody who wants to join in and watch and participate. And they got all kind of fun stuff planned, guys. You're not going to want to miss this. June 20th to the 26th. You can catch it online on either imec.world, imec.world, or their YouTube channel, the International Mandela Effect Conference. We hope to see everybody there June 20th to the 26th. 15 speakers, 6 days, one event. It's going to be incredible. Also, coming up June 17th, we will be joining Heather Wade on the Kingdom of Nye radio network, and radio show, I'm pretty sure it's the Kingdom of Nye Radio Network, too. I'll have to double-check that. I might have misspoken. Anyway, guys, go ahead and check us out over there. We would really, really love to have your support. June 17th. And we will announce that. It will be on a Wednesday, so we'll also announce that the night of the show. It is Wednesday, June 10th, 2020, and tonight we're going to talk about an experiment that is just absolutely out of this world in more ways than one. If anyone caught the Rippin' Rabbit Hole show here on the network a couple weeks ago, then you know that AJ, our buddy over there, discussed Houdini and how he would dress up and infiltrate seances and expose the frauds claiming to have paranormal abilities. And of course, I think this is absolutely amazing. In my opinion, skepticism is the most important trait to have. I try to stay skeptic on everything that I do. And the reason is, if I can't disprove it, I have proven it. That is the best way, in this host's opinion and researcher's opinion, to prove pretty much anything. But I loathe, as much as I love the paranormal, I loathe the frauds that make the topics, in general, just generally look absolutely ridiculous. It's horrible, and it should be called out, and you should have something done about it. But what we're going to discuss tonight is the only paranormal experiment that I know of that was carried out under full skeptical scrutiny and holds up to this very day. That's right, this is one of the most under-talked about and overly important topics in the paranormal world. and why even the most hardened skeptic should open their minds to the ideas that something more is in this world and perhaps the next. You see, in 1993, a group of people named the Bennetts and the Foys decided to get together and try some paranormal experiments. The Bennetts were psychics and the Foys were paranormal researchers and had been for many, many years. So this is already set up to be a research experiment. But what we're going to hear tonight is more than you could ever imagine.
In the mid-1990s, in the tiny English village of Scole, one of the most remarkable experiments ever attempted in communication with the dead took place. The Scole experimental group who conducted these experiments consisted of Diana and Alan Bennett, two of Britain's most accomplished mediums, as well as organisers and investigators, Robin and Sandra Foy.
Hi, hello there.
Nice to see you.
For 5 years, twice a week, the group would meet in this tiny cellar. Here the Bennetts would go into trance, allowing what they say were the voices of the dead to speak through them. But the Scole group went far beyond this, achieving spectacular results in a claimed form of spirit communication known as physical mediumship.
For those who may have never heard the term before, physical mediums are believed to produce materialization of spirits, apports of objects, and other effects such as knocking, rapping, bell ringing, etc., by using, quote, ectoplasm, end quote, created from the cells of their bodies and those of seance attendees. An apport of object also means an object will literally appear out of thin air and drop into reality or manifest.
There's a wide range of phenomena that physical mediumship over the centuries has been supposedly able to produce. Objects levitating, chairs, tables, objects in the room. Apports and teleportation, in other words, things just dropping out of nowhere. Sometimes things disappearing and reappearing. Apparent spirit hands, apparent spirit forms. Things that people can see happening. There's an effect on real objective things based on, supposedly, the communication or contact between a medium and the spirit world. The spirits are using the medium as a conduit to cause these events to happen.
And in all my research, this is the strongest case of physical mediumship I've ever came across in 30 years, as we will hear shortly.
Physical mediumship is entirely different from mental mediumship because everybody that's present at the time can witness what's happening. Such as if a voice comes from mid-air, everybody can hear and converse with the voice.
Very nice of you to have us here.
If a spirit person manifests, everybody can see what happens.
I think it's fair to say that when you have sittings with physical groups as successful as the Scole group, you see miracles. You see things which cannot be explained under normal laws of science.
And the voice you're hearing belongs to a guy named David Fontana, who was one of the heaviest skeptics involved with the project and would go on later to be one of 3 co-authors on the final Scole report.
Trying to communicate with the dead has been a lifelong passion for Robin and Sandra Foy. Today, they are among the world's leading experts in physical mediumship.
What happened here during the Scole experiment was very successful and a dramatic effort, which proved conclusively to us that life goes on after we all die.
Robin and Sandra, of course, having hosted all of these events, at least for the first 5 years, that they were conducted in their own cellar in the basement in Scole, Norfolk, England.
Diana and Alan Bennett have also participated in physical mediumship for decades. They joined the Scole experiment in 1993. But both claim their astonishing abilities began long before this.
My first discovery of being a medium was when I was a child. I used to see spirit. I used to hear things and be aware of things that other people weren't aware.
When I was young, I saw spirits that would come and show themselves to me.
I think the greatest effort come from the spirit side. I mean, without them, you can sit there and nothing will happen.
But a great deal did happen, more in fact than any other mediumship experiment ever conducted. And according to the Scole group, this success was due to the efforts of a group of deceased personalities on the other side. They called this group the Spirit Team.
A Spirit Team was a team of spirit personalities who had lived a life on this earth. Several of them had been scientists whilst they were here.
The fact that they are a group of scientists from the other side will become very, very important later, so please do keep that in mind.
The Scole group say instructions on how to conduct the experiments were received from the Spirit Team, speaking via the mediums. Some of the initial experiments involved photography.
And let's be clear, they didn't just sit down in the cellar just one day and start doing this. No, this took a lot of dedication and effort. They met twice a week, every week, for almost a year until they actually got any kind of real tangible anything coming through from spirit. But when it picked up, oh, did it ever. They were first instructed on how to obtain photographic evidence from the other side and show that both sides were working together. And these photographs, I've got links to the show notes down below on if you're watching on YouTube. And you guys have got to go over and check these out. Oh my goodness.
These began conventionally enough, with the Foys being told to load a film into a camera and place it on the table. But after this, things began to get very strange.
We heard the camera moving round over our heads, and clicking and being wound on by spirit.
In total darkness, so that in reality, nothing should have showed up on the film.
And to paint a picture for you here, the four of them are sitting around a table having a seance, two of them in trance, two of them observing everything going on. And they put a camera on the table in total darkness. Everything was done in the beginning in total darkness.
But when the film was developed, there were amazing pictures. Wartime pictures of St. Paul's, of a bus that was blown apart in the Blitz. Quite amazing stuff. It was never explained to us exactly why we got these particular pictures, other than the fact that we had a separate photographic spirit team working with us at that stage who were practicing their art and seeing what they could achieve.
And this is merely my speculation and conjecture, but I would say that they were probably establishing the time period in which they were alive during the wartime periods. That's why I believe they would be showing them these particular pictures to let them know exactly when the people they were dealing with lived, and we'll get into more of that momentarily.
Some films contained images of faces, including human faces, in various stages of formation.
There were a series that appeared to represent bubbles and various other things coming together, partial faces, etc. We were told that what we were seeing were areas of communication within the spirit world.
And as we know, a lot of near-death experiencers have described different parts of the, quote, other side, end quote, including one area that has been referenced more than once called the park.
The Scole group believed these faces were images of deceased people, which were somehow projected from the other side. To them, this theory was confirmed with the appearance on another Scole film of this blurry profile. Communicators through the mediums informed them that it belonged to a man named Kingsley Fairbridge, who had died in 1924.
We were put in touch in a very obscure way with his daughter, who was happy to agree that that was a picture of her father.
Okay, to do a little recap here, we've got two psychics in a trance, two people not in a trance watching everything, in the darkness nonetheless. Through the psychics in the trance, they've already been instructed to bring a camera and set it on the table in the darkness. The camera then lifts itself up and continues to take pictures on its own in complete and utter darkness. So you expect nothing to be on the photos. However, you end up with pictures from wartime, old wartime, even pictures of like Woodrow Wilson, if I'm not mistaken who that is. So you've got pictures on something that should, number one, have never had pictures. Then you get a profile of a man called Fairbridge. And they're then told the name by these psychic mediums in trance, and then on top of everything else are able to verify all the information garnered this way through the daughter of the person who completely and absolutely, as you just heard, verified that that really was her father they were talking about. If this isn't already a wild beginning to a story, guys, I don't know what is, and we are just getting started.
By 1995, visitors were reporting that the Scole hole was alive with extraordinary phenomena. According to the Scole group, their spirit communicators requested that they place this empty glass dome on their table.
The glass dome was very important to the Scole work. Creative energy stored in the dome and was used by the spirit team to produce the phenomena that happened at Scole.
In this remarkable photograph, the energy can actually be seen radiating out from the dome. But since these phenomena are so unusual, the group knew that without careful independent scrutiny, their experiments would be dismissed as fake. Therefore, the group allowed their experiments to be monitored by a team of scientists and paranormal investigators from the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR, based in London. For over a century, the SPR has specialized in examining paranormal phenomena in an unbiased and scientific way. Among its members have been some of Britain's most accomplished scientists, including a dozen Nobel laureates. Its investigators have exposed many fake mediums. They are not easily fooled. One of the leading researchers into Scole was veteran SPR member Montague Keane.
And here is Montague Keane explaining what the Society for Psychical Research really is.
I've been a member of the Society for Psychical Research since the 1940s, but it's only in the last 10 or 12 years that I've been actively involved. And for the last, I suppose, 10 years, I've been acting as either chairman of the Image and Publicity Committee and secretary of the Survival Research Committee. Now, the Survival Research Committee is involved in encouraging research into aspects of the survival of human consciousness after death and into mediumship, which, of course, is associated with it. The Society for Psychical Research has an extraordinarily notorious reputation for being scientifically rigorous, and many people consider that it goes overboard in its skepticism. But in fact, it has been extremely, over the years, it's been extremely careful to ensure that the material that it produces, by and large, goes through the peer review system and is as scientifically kosher as anything can be. And indeed, because we are dealing with those things which are extraordinary, we consider that extraordinary things do require a much higher level of authenticity than would normally be required for things which are within the scientific paradigm. Indeed, over the years, the SPR has been responsible for exposing quite a number of hoaxes, starting with the rather notorious Hodgson report back in the 1880s into Madame Blavatsky, although his methodology has now been found to be a bit doubtful, but particularly with its investigations into physical mediums. And it was extremely difficult to get anything past the SPR's hierarchy, which appeared to show physical mediumship in a positive light. In more recent years, that has changed somewhat, but the rigor required of scientific investigation is really very high. From the point of view of investigators, and I'm now looking at it as a Society for Psychical Research investigator, our object was to see whether the reports that we'd had of amazing physical phenomena being produced by this group of mediums in the village of Scole in Norfolk, whether those phenomena could be produced under conditions which positively excluded the possibility of fraud. And so our object initially, and indeed throughout the whole of our investigation, was to see whether in agreement with the people sitting around the table, the group, and in agreement with the communicators from the other side who were regarded by them as their mentors and who ruled the roost, as it were, we could agree upon procedures for the production of physical phenomena, particularly physical phenomena related to the production of films. The aims and purpose of the investigators of the Scole group was to discover whether, in conjunction with them and by agreement with them, we could work out a series of protocols, a series of rules for the production of physical phenomena which would positively exclude any possibility of fraud. Initially, we were all pretty skeptical because what had been claimed seemed so way out. What had been claimed primarily was concerned with the production of pictures without cameras, without any form of manipulation by anyone. And this seemed to us to be worthy of investigation with a very critical hat on.
This is a group that would make Houdini proud, and this is a group whose research I really love to look into as much as I can because they do what I try to do. They try to debunk things in order to prove them. And in this particular case, they were about to get proven themselves things they never would have ever believed beforehand.
Another key researcher was Dr. Arthur Ellison, an emeritus professor of electrical engineering and a former president of the SPR.
No scientist of any kind would ever say that anything could not possibly happen.
And that is the difference between a real scientist and a dogmatic scientist. A real scientist will accept the evidence as is. A dogmatic scientist will ignore it or make it disappear.
The third principal investigator was research psychologist Dr. David Fontana. Professor Fontana is one of the world's most respected paranormal investigators.
Paranormal is that mysterious area behind the seen and the known world. And since most of the world is unseen and unknown, and most of the world is full of mystery, for me it's a fascinating and absorbing area.
To preclude the possibility of fraud, these scientists were allowed to inspect the cellar and all its contents before and after sessions. All participants had to empty their pockets and leave their belongings outside. The cellar had only one entrance, and this door was kept locked during all sessions.
So you would think at this point the gig must be up, they must be caught. There's no way they can get under some kind of scientific scrutiny like this and still pull off any kind of tricks if that was the case. And that was not the case, Illusions, as we will soon learn, but it's just really intriguing because if that were the case, the show wouldn't last very long.
Despite these precautions, the incredible events at Scole continued unabated, and the SPR investigators reported what they saw in graphic terms.
We saw coloured lights, we saw materializations, we had direct voices, that is, spirit voices talking from the air. We were touched by the spirits. We saw a whole range of phenomena which could not be mistaken by three investigators such as ourselves.
I must reiterate that came from a skeptic.
In the spirit of openness, the Scole group allowed more investigators to scrutinize their sessions. These included leading scientists from several disciplines, even a professional magician. One of the scientists was the internationally renowned biologist and author, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake.
Science has done very little to investigate the afterlife or reincarnation. Most materialists assume that both of them are impossible. So there's a kind of dogmatic denial by some scientists of the possibility of these things. But I wouldn't say that was a scientific understanding. I would say that was a dogmatic, ideologically motivated dismissal. The only way to have a scientific understanding is to do the research.
We had a number of different professors of different disciplines to come, and sometimes they could test their expertise against the expertise on the other side. For example, Professor Archie Roy, who's an astronomer and specialises in the movement of celestial bodies, had a discussion with the other side about celestial mechanics. And he said afterwards that he thought there were only about half a dozen people in the country who would know exactly what they were talking about.
And again, to reiterate, when he said he had a discussion with the other side, he means through the trance medium, who is allowing the spirit to speak through them and has knowledge they could in no way whatsoever have. And as the man said, only a very small handful of people in the entire world would even begin to understand.
Such evidence is gold dust to researchers, as it is unlikely to have been fabricated by the mediums who possess no academic training in this area. Although the scientists found this sort of evidence impressive, they still needed to eliminate any possibility of fraud taking place under the cover of darkness. Therefore, the Scole group devised several controls to help eliminate this possibility. One of these controls involved all participants wearing luminous wristbands. These bands were attached with Velcro, so they could not be removed without attracting attention.
As well as them being Velcro, they also asked that they kept them on the table or inside at all times.
They also requested the use of night vision equipment.
We persistently asked them to accept infrared cameras, and they said not yet. It would interfere with the energy in some way. So we had to accept this with great reluctance.
And I've recently looked into the work of a guy named Barry Fitzgerald, whose work suggests that the infrared light may actually have negative effects on the spirit form or the energy itself that spirit is made of.
We were told that this phenomena could be developed in the light, but if it were, it would take an awfully long time to produce, years and years, rather than a few months that it actually took us.
Critics saw this insistence on darkness as an excuse to hide fraud. But participants to the Scole experiment were not always in total darkness.
Today we have a phenomenon that we call orbs or spirit lights, but in the Scole experiment, these spirit lights were filling the room like fireflies of all sizes everywhere, floating around and flying around and even going in and out of people.
There were various shapes, generally like a pea-sized light, and it had substance. They would come and sit on your hand. You could feel them.
They were intelligently directed and intelligently moving and would be responsive to our wishes, whether expressed or silent.
We must remember that these were done under as controlled a condition as possible by the SPR group and the Scole experiment spirit team.
The gyrations were sometimes so rapid that it almost left like a circle of light going over here and over there. Sometimes two lights would appear and just stare at me within inches of my eyes.
I thought at first that the lights must be small light-emitting diodes suspended on the end of nylon fishing line.
Then suddenly a light would start to do a tap dance on the table, bouncing up and down on the table, and you could hear it click as it rebounded from the table.
And as Rupert Sheldrake just said, as any good skeptic and scientist would, we would assume that these are just LEDs on fishing string. That would make the most logical sense, right?
And suddenly it went pop, went through the table and came out the other side. Now, no nylon fishing line explanation would account for it going through an apparently solid, well, it was a solid object, a table.
Well, it would appear that the explanation of LEDs on fishing line is completely out of the window.
The lights also had another rather strange trick up their sleeve, if I may talk about light as having sleeves, and that was to pass through bodies.
I was actually used as a guinea pig in the early days to see how it felt and to develop the phenomena. And this light would actually enter through my chest, and then 3 minutes later it would probably pop out of the arm or something and disappear across the room. This was being developed to produce a healing phenomena.
So the scientist spirit team on the other side had finally found a way through the spirit lights to enter into one's body and heal the body while inside and then exit.
I have this bad knee, and at one point we had a light that was moving around the room and rested on my knee for a minute and suddenly moved inside my knee.
Yeah, she just went into my bad knee.
And that piece of audio you just heard with a bunch of people in the room was actual audio from that experiment going on at that moment.
I could feel it moving around on my knee and then all of a sudden shot out the back of my leg and took off. The pain was greatly reduced and the swelling that had been in it that day was gone, and that was a huge, wonderful thing to happen.
Visitors declared themselves delighted by these displays.
But little did they know the spirit team had yet another trick up their proverbial sleeves.
But they were astonished to hear voices of what they say were spirit personalities talking through the mediums.
We had 1,000 hours of communication during the Scole experiment. 1,000 hours of continuous communication with the spirit world.
Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet.
Emily, when did you live on the earth?
Oh, a long time ago now.
19th century?
Yes.
In this dramatic form of spirit communication, the mediums go into trance, during which time, they say, spirits take over their bodies and speak through them.
As promised, the Scole experiment is a crossroads of many, many rabbit holes. One of those being spirit communication directly through a trance medium. What is very interesting and intriguing about these is the entire voice, vocal pattern, personality, everything about the person completely changes into the personality and voice and everything else of the spirit, which does in no way match what the original trance medium would either know or be able to replicate in a conscious state.
It's the love that connects people.
Right.
And the rest doesn't matter a jot.
So what's it like to supposedly talk to the dead in this way?
It becomes very natural. And actually talking to somebody who is deceased, if you like, is a natural thing. Purely and simply because it's the same as you talking to me here in this room at this very moment. There's no difference other than the fact that we are aware that they're no longer in this world.
And not be frightened in any way.
But could the mediums have just been acting? The researchers didn't think so.
The voices were quite different from those of the mediums themselves, and the personalities behind the voices were not only quite different, but were very consistent. Even the accents were.
This is something that you find quite a bit with trance mediums, is the fact that they will take on the personality and abilities and attitude and voice and everything of the deceased person without even trying or having knowledge of doing it.
But it wasn't just the consistency of the accents that impressed the researchers. They reported that the personalities also remembered every detail of all conversations spoken to visitors over a 5-year period.
Now think about that for a minute. Could you do that if you were trying, even if you were trying to fake something like this? Could you remember every conversation that you had with every person you talked to over the last 5 years? I know that I, as one person, couldn't, but if there were many conversations, or many entities, I should say, coming through the psychic medium or trance medium, and these different ones were interacting, then each one would only have to remember their own interactions with said person.
Add to those skills the ability to read minds. This apparently occurred when a female spirit spoke to the group.
She would tell us what was going to happen. She would comment on what we were doing and sometimes what we were thinking. She would answer our questions quite frequently before we'd actually asked them, which was quite embarrassing sometimes.
To have your eyes closed and have no body language or anything to read and still be able to answer a question before it is asked, that clearly is not fakery by any means whatsoever. There is something else going on there.
Thank you for your warm appreciation of what we're trying to do.
This communicator identified herself as the spirit of a Mrs. Emily Bradshaw.
And Mrs. Bradshaw, who was a very commanding figure, a lady of the upper-class Victorian or Edwardian lady. She sounded like that.
Mrs. Bradshaw would go on to continue to be a part of the spirit team on the other side for the rest of the remainder of the experiments.
We continue from our side of life to influence people still in the body.
But what evidence was there that these voices were really from the deceased?
We knew that we were communicating with deceased personalities because a number of people who communicated with us were able to be identified by independent witnesses at the time who could testify as to them being people they knew, evidence which couldn't possibly have been known by anybody else.
And this is yet another classic example of real medium work and having the ability to have information that would otherwise be unknown without doing any kind of cold reading or fakery as such.
But what's it like for the mediums to have these ethereal communicators speak through them?
Those sensations become more and more intense and build up to a point where I feel the personality actually taking part of my senses over. I become more and more unaware of my own body and also more and more unaware of my own thoughts.
So far, we've covered a large amount of paranormal phenomena, and you would think that maybe that would be all there is, but we're only just getting started. There is so much more to this story to come. We haven't even barely scratched the surface. But as you guys know, that music means it is time to take a break, so we will be right back in just a couple minutes right here on Darkwolf's Den on Rippin' Common Sense Radio. Don't you go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hi, everyone. It's AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit. Are you enjoying the DarkWolf's Den Show with Jerry Hicks on the Soul Experiment? I know I am. If you've enjoyed the program up to this point, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell with notifications. You'll get our live notifications every time we go live, every Wednesday through Sunday nights, right here on the very best of Common Sense Radio, the Rippin' Rabbit Hole. All shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. As an extended weekend continues, Thursday night, I'll return with hidden attractions. That's right, very hidden attractions, waiting just perhaps to be rediscovered. Some of these places will inspire and surprise you, so make sure that you tune in tomorrow night, June 11th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then Friday night, we're going to have a special guest speaker. Regina Meredith will be here. She's the author of the book Accidentally on Purpose. She's also going to be the keynote speaker of the International Mandela Effect Conference. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic evening. That's Friday, June 12th, 2020, with Regina Meredith, Accidentally on Purpose, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then Saturday night, join us for Subliminal Stimuli. We're going to take a look at how it works. And can you spot hidden messages in our world today? Find out Saturday night, June 13th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then we'll end out the weekend together with our friends from the International Mandela Effect Conference. More guest speakers will join us. Cynthia Sue Larson will be here with Jerry Hicks himself, along with Dale DeFay, to talk about the upcoming IMEC.World conference that starts June 20th and goes through June 26th. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's an IMEC Mandela weekend extravaganza for sure. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you jump on our mailing list. We made some changes today. That's why it went out a little bit later than usual. We were really trying to fix, the inbox penetration so that that particular email doesn't end up in your spam or junk mail folder. Our top hats off to last Sunday's fantastic Fun King Queen. Nikki Rabbit took the throne. If you weren't there, boy, you missed out. It was a fantastic family game night. We'll do it again in July and see who will take the throne. We're going to be back to DarkWolf's Den. Jerry Hicks in just a moment with more The Scole Experiment. Stick around. Rippin' Common Sense Radio right here on the rippinrabbithole.com.
Are you a YouTube creator that's tired of fighting over copyright issues for using the wrong music in your videos? Or perhaps a songwriter looking for something new? I know when I started DarkWolf's Den, I needed some original music, and for me, the answer was a no-brainer. I immediately called Tom Baillies of Red Shed Studios. Tom has been in the music industry for over 20 years and has a true passion for the art. So if you need a custom soundtrack for your next project, make sure you contact Tom Baillies at Red Shed Studios at 920-344-7634. That's 920-344-7634. Red Shed Studios. And welcome back, everybody, for the second half of the DarkWolf's Den Show. I am Jerry Hicks, as you guys know, the Dark Wolf. That's right. We are exploring tonight one of my favorite crossroads of the rabbit holes. As you guys know, we hit these crossroads every now and again where all these rabbit holes kind of come together. Well, we're at one of those crossroads tonight. It's one of my favorites. It's the Scole Experiment. For those just tuning in, you have missed an incredible first half of evidence that is just out of this world, mind-boggling, and evidence that sounds so crazy it almost seems like it belongs in its own sci-fi movie. However, every bit of this evidence garnered has been 100% verified, at least to some degree or the other, except so far the pictures, like we spoke about in the first half, that Spirit would pick the camera up and take the pictures all around the room, right? Well, now we've got scientists involved from the SPR, or Society of Psychical Research, who have devised their own little experiment, if you will, or way to test this in order to make sure that no fraudulent activity is going on with these films that are being exposed to spirit, and see if they can find a way to prove that this is just a hoax, right?
After 2 years of intense effort, the Scole experiment began to produce more phenomena than in any mediumship experiment in the history of the paranormal.
Their initial claims were that they were in contact with a group of deceased entities who were producing, with their help, a number of pictures of either deceased persons or strips of films, which they claimed to be produced without any cameras and in the dark.
And as the old adage goes, extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. But were the researchers and investigators able to garner extraordinary evidence under such harsh scientific scrutinies as we are about to hear? Let's find out.
To eliminate any possibility of hoaxing, the scientists brought their own film and locked it in a specially designed security box.
The box was held in the hands of the investigators so that no one could get at it. And then immediately afterwards, we would take it out of the box ourselves so that no one else touched it, and then develop it ourselves in a special machine.
All right, go ahead and place your bets in chat now. Do you think that they actually gained something on the film? Or do you think because it was under such scrutiny and locked in this box with the investigator holding it, the investigator wrote the film, nothing able to be tampered with whatsoever beforehand or after, under scientific scrutiny the entire time? Do you just think it was just completely empty film, like it would be if you just bought a canister at the store and just developed it? Because, back in those days, it was the days of film developing instead of the insta-develop you have now to just take a picture and it's there. So go ahead, bets in the chat. What do you think? Yes or no? Do you think they got evidence of any kind of spirit form under scientific scrutiny, or do you think it failed horribly?
Despite all these precautions, the experiments continued to produce the incredible images seen here.
They were able to achieve whole lengths of film, sometimes up to as much as 4 feet, with various words, symbols, messages, all sorts of different things on that film.
Other films contained poems in centuries-old German and fragments of Greek, Chinese, Hebrew, Latin, and even Sanskrit. The Scole group were ordinary people with no knowledge of these languages.
And for those of you who said that they came out with images, congratulations. Go ahead and give yourself a claw mark. You got it right. That is incredible. Under absolute scientific scrutiny, these images came out. Words, languages that is, number one, absolutely and incredibly hard to learn. Number two, hard to learn that many languages. Trust me, I barely speak English well. And number three, like it was just mentioned, these were normal people. People who wouldn't know these languages, not to count that the film itself was in a box, in a canister, signed by the scientist holding the box the entire time. Even if they wanted to, there was no way that they could have gotten to this to make it fraudulent by any means whatsoever.
But did these films have a purpose? If dead personalities were producing these images, why did they apparently design some of them as complex puzzles?
Providing something which is a puzzle, which is difficult to solve, is simply because it is difficult to solve. It isn't readily available. It can't be easily attributable to the person sitting around the table.
Despite lengthy investigations, the possible authors of some of the films, like this German poem, proved impossible to trace. But others were easier to track down. This one contains a poem by Frederick Myers. Intriguingly, Myers was one of the founders of the SPR and a passionate researcher into the evidence for life after death.
And you remember in the first half I told you to remember that scientists from the other side communicating to this side would become very important, and it will continue to as we go on. But here's one example of an ex-head of the SPR itself communicating back from the other side to prove from that side that it is real, at least evidence that that could be the case.
Before he died in 1901, he promised his colleagues at the SPR that he would try to communicate with them from the other side. Could this film actually represent evidence of the afterlife sent by one of its greatest investigators? Mostly the researchers were unclear as to who might have created these films. However, there were clues as to who the ghostly authors might be in the form of initials or signatures. For example, in this film, the signature appears to belong to the dead singer and actor Ivor Novello. This was received on one of the Scole films. Compare it to Novello's actual signature.
It is almost completely 100% spot on, minus one very, very small discrepancy, but still not big enough to call it a fake or fraud by any means. Too close to not call it the same.
Investigators say these images were created in total darkness. But how?
I think that those pictures can be explained only by imagining that the spirits can project their recollections and images onto a film in some way we can't begin to understand.
And now we've come upon the absolute number one most incredible piece of photographic evidence of the entire experiment, in my opinion. Check this out.
The Scole group say that their spirit communicators suggested ways of improving their experiments. For example, they told Professor Ellison, one of the SPR scientists, how to build a device for boosting communications via the tape recorder.
Which would later go on to be called the germanium device, because it was two coils of wire on each side, electromagnetic coils that created a void in the middle in which a piece of germanium was placed, and this was used for whatever reason to increase the ability of communication. Now, what is interesting is that if you look up germanium, you actually find that it is used for carbon nanotubes, which is really interesting, so take that as you may.
But this information arrived in a very strange way. These images appeared after an unexposed film locked in the security box was later processed by the scientists. The scientists speculated about who was providing this technical information. Then initials at the end of the film seemed to have solved this mystery.
I wrote to the Edison Memorial people in America, and they sent me a copy of one of his letters, which contained his initials, which looked almost identical to the signature on this film.
This matching set of initials convinced the researchers it was Thomas Edison providing this information. Not only was Edison the world's most famous inventor, he also had an enormous interest in the possibility of an afterlife.
And as you guys know, and as we discussed in the earlier episode on reincarnation that we did, Edison was actually quite obsessed with the afterlife, considering he had lost 2 children to tuberculosis, and was actually working on a couple inventions to attempt this, as we'll hear in just a moment.
His intention to build a machine that could communicate with the dead made headlines around the world, but he died before being able to build it. Is it possible that through the Scole group, he finally achieved this aim?
And I again, just one more time, must reiterate this film come from a reel of photo that was locked inside a canister signed by the skeptic, who had locked it into the box himself, was holding the box, and also was a part of the processing team that processed the film. So either way you cut it, there was no chance of this being fraudulent. And to get the exact signature, that is just more than amazing.
Although the mechanism for their creation remains a mystery, investigators concluded they were unique.
As far as the photographic evidence is concerned at Scole, the strips of film, there has, in my view, never been anything like that at all, ever.
And I cannot reiterate enough times how important it is when a skeptic says something like that.
The only alternative explanation is they are all fakes, and I don't believe that there's evidence that that is the case.
And you guys remember in the first half we spoke about physical mediums and how they were different and set apart from mental mediums. And so far we're yet to hear any kind of differential between, hauntings and evidence of hauntings, minus the photographs, which are kind of amazing. But besides that, we're yet to hear anything really different opposed to a physical or mental medium, being present. However, we're about to explore another thing that happened at Scole, which takes us down yet another rabbit hole.
At Scole, visitors reported seeing and especially hearing these objects materialize from out of nowhere. In the language of physical mediumship, these objects are called apports.
An apport is an object which is quite solid, which is brought from one location to another during an experimental session, but in so doing apparently passes through solid walls, doors, etc. Well, the total number of apports that we had during the experimental sessions was about 80 or even more. Whilst we were sitting here, this object would arrive, just materialise, and arrive on the table. But as it arrived, that's the sort of noise it would make.
And as you guys may or may not know, one of my favorite stories by my friend Cynthia Sue Larson is when she talks about her keys that were locked in the trunk, and suddenly as they were meditating and concentrating on trying to get the keys and, relaxing and thinking about it with love and content. And I won't go into the details of how it works, but the point is the keys appeared or apparated out of the trunk right into their lap, right in front of them, right in the middle of the air, and fell right in their lap.
Despite the fact that witnesses heard a loud bang every time an apport arrived, no matter how small, skeptics have dismissed this phenomenon as objects merely thrown into the air.
And as a skeptical-minded person myself, I gotta say I totally agree with that assumption. Well, at least at first glance. But is as common with the Scole experiment as we're starting to see that just might not be the case after all.
But the appearance of these apports are not so easy to explain away. These newspapers arrived in pristine condition, despite having originated in the 1940s. But who might have sent it to the Scole group, and why? The answer arrived, they say, when dead British medium Helen Duncan spoke to them via one of the mediums. During World War II, Duncan's life was ruined when she was arrested and imprisoned for practicing mediumship. As she described her ordeal to the group, this newspaper allegedly appeared out of nowhere. To their astonishment, displayed prominently on its front page was the story of Duncan's trial and conviction.
I think she suffered greatly through her mediumship, and she was really coming to wish us well, and she bought the newspaper as a sign of a very turbulent time in her life.
The scientists knew that an old newspaper could easily be copied and printed onto modern paper, so Montague Keane had the suspect newspaper analysed.
And once again, if you're playing along at home or in the chat, go ahead and place your bets now. Do you think it was just a fake, a copy of an old material onto new paper, or do you think it actually could have been something that could be proven from the 1940s or in that era, something that could prove that it was a different type of paper or maybe different chemicals used? Do you think that it's going to prove out to be a real fake or a real legit paper? Survey says 3, 2, 1.
We took it to the leading research station in England, indeed in the world, on paper and printing, and it was absolutely clear from their report that, first of all, it was done on letterpress, which has gone out of existence virtually since the early 1970s, I would say. It was newsprint produced during wartime, which lacked certain chemicals which you couldn't get hold of. So this was a genuine article which appeared 50 years after the event, but no one has been able to explain how it got there.
And if you said that it was going to be proven as absolutely legit, go ahead and give yourself another claw mark. You got it absolutely right. Way to go. Congratulations. Guys, think about this. He said that it is an absolute proof of a 40-year-old newspaper that dropped right out of the sky and fell on the table, proving nonetheless in an article on the front page most likely who it was from, connecting from the other side. But there's yet another question that begs to be asked.
So where did all these apported objects come from?
We were told by the spirit team that they were never stolen, but were basically objects that had been lost or discarded, or at one time been owned by the spirit personality that brought them.
And pulling back out of the Apport rabbit hole now, it is amazing to me the fact that this is even a part of this case, because this is the first time and the only time besides Cynthia Sue Larson's story that I've ever run across apportation. And this still yet was not the end of the tricks that the spirit team had up their sleeve for the Scole experiment group.
At Scole, the phenomena were continuing to progress. The scientists were about to experience something even more shocking.
Another thing that happened was that a hand materialized and sort of glowed. And there was this disembodied hand floating around. When I told some of my friends about it, they said it sounded just like the Addams Family. And I commented to the medium, I said, "Oh, I can see a disembodied hand." And she said, "It's not disembodied." This was Mrs. Bradshaw, who was speaking through one of the mediums.
And you remember also Mrs. Bradshaw was mentioned as being a part of the group, and she does continue all the way through the entire series of Scole Experiment.
And I said, "You mean there's an invisible body attached?" And she said, "Precisely." And then she said, "Would you like it to touch you?" And I said, "Yes." So she said, "Well, ask it." So I said, "Hand, will you touch me?" And so the hand went round behind me and it tapped me on the shoulder.
I gotta say, as a person that has loved the paranormal for a very long time, if a disembodied hand climbed itself over through the air and tapped me on the shoulder, even I would be just a little bit on the weirded out side.
But could these hands have been hoaxed? This visitor who felt the truncated length of a disembodied arm didn't think so.
And I was so startled, I moved my hand and it traveled right up a sleeve. There was a sleeve, like a cotton sleeve, very much like this, right up to the shoulder, and then it just stopped. There was nothing beyond where the shoulder would have been. It was a really amazing experience.
So at first the argument could be made that it's just somebody standing there with a costume on. However, when you get to the shoulder and there's nothing there, you run out of argument for reality.
Oh, yes, yes, oh, yes. Yes, it's a hand. It's stretched to the fingers. Oh, I see it, yes.
And that audio is directly from the Scole experiment at the time of it actually happening.
Sometimes we would be touched by these hands. Sometimes we would invite them to touch us. Sometimes they would touch us on our knees, let's say, or on our feet, which, as it was a fraud-proof table, were inaccessible to the mediums themselves.
Again, as the man just said, it was a fraud-proof table that was inaccessible by the mediums themselves, though, so there was no way for them to fake it whatsoever.
So what's it like to touch one of these spirit hands?
It felt cool, but not cold. It didn't feel clammy, it didn't feel slimy, it felt like a normal human hand, and it grasped my hand firmly.
The unseen communicators told the scientists that they usually materialized a hand or an arm because it was easier than materializing a full body.
Which is yet another interesting fact, because as we know, in most haunting case files, you only get a piece of the body, a hand or an arm generally, or a finger even, generally being what is observed, or first seen in most haunting cases. If any full body apparition is seen, it's usually more rare, though they do happen often. It is usually just a single body part or even orbs of light, as we know in most haunting case files.
But some cases of full bodies being materialized were reported.
I had the presence, the physical presence, of my mother, my father, and my sister, all in solid form, standing in front of me, all of whom I was able to hold, to embrace, carry out conversations with them. I've witnessed it so many times, it just becomes a normal thing.
Which is what we do here on the DarkWolf's Den Show. We make the paranormal just a little bit more normal.
Normal is a word strained by the experiences of the Scole experiment. And there was nothing normal when patches of light floated over the scientists' heads and slowly changed into spectral forms.
What intrigues me when I hear this is the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, in a lot of haunted case files, orbs are reported, and some of these do have spectral entities that also do appear. So it's interesting that one would come out of the other, equivalently in the experiment.
The diffuse patches of light would take the form just of a human face, moving round the room with the direct voice, very, very faintly, coming from the diffused patch of light, and the lips moving, again, very faintly.
And we have now gone from the voices being only coming from the trance mediums to being coming from the middle of the air, the middle of the room itself. This is even harder to fake.
As I stared at the face, it was noticeably smaller than a normal size head. But within the face itself, features were clearly visible. We could see the glistening of the eyes, we could see the eyes moving.
And even more remarkable forms were to appear.
They looked like angelic forms.
Is that what's under my hands?
Oh my goodness, look at that.
And once again, that audio is recorded directly from the experiments happening at the time of the experiment.
And I was very fortunate that one came and landed on my hand. And just the energy that you felt from it when it connected with you was a lovely experience, and it just felt like an overwhelming feeling of love.
Which is almost the exact same words that every person who has ever had a near-death experience has ever reported, is that once they get to the other side, it is an absolute and complete feeling of utter and pure love like nothing on this earth that has ever been experienced. But we're about to switch gears one more time and take these experiments to an even higher level.
Spurred on by the photographic experiments, the Scole group began a series of video experiments called Project Alice, after Alice through the looking glass.
I'm sure my Mandela Effect community, among others, can really appreciate that reference.
Their ambition was nothing less than to try and capture moving images sent from the spirit world. The Scole group insists that instructions on how to position the camera and mirrors came from their spirit communicators. They were told to set up a video camera in the dark cellar, aim it at a pair of mirrors so that it could only film its own viewfinder. While it was recording, nothing unusual was seen. But when the tape was played back, these remarkable pictures appeared.
We had images on the video, sometimes of what looked like a tunnel of light. Other times spirit faces were coming towards us. Sometimes what appeared to be a doorway moving.
Skeptics claim these images were created by video feedback, occurring when a camera records its own output.
All right, guys, round 3 of Will He or Won't He. We have the evidence now presented by the tapes of the video camera off of 2 mirrors back into itself. Could these be causing all these different dimensional doorways and faces and moving images and all these different things? Well, let's hear what they said. What do you guys think? Go ahead and put your yes or no in chat. I would love to know. What do you think? Do you think that it was proven? Or do you think that this was the point that the skeptics said, no way, we've got them, this is it? What do you say? Go ahead and put your answers in chat, and we'll find out in 3, 2, 1, and...
But scientists have ruled this out. Video feedback doesn't produce this kind of result. As to what these extraordinary pictures represent, we can only guess, since their meaning was never explained to the Scole group. This video, also totally unexplained, appears to be a ghostly face with moving eyes. Later, a few video experiments were attempted in full light. Again, nothing unusual was seen during the recording. However, on playback, this unworldly figure appeared.
And this figure that they're talking about looks like your classic gray almond-shaped head, the slit mouth, stuff like that. But the eyes aren't the great big bulging black. It looks almost like smaller versions of our eyes. Though they're still pure black, they still look like, smaller versions. It isn't the great big ones that take up the entire head.
But was it possible for the Scole group to have faked these images? Not according to the investigator who monitored these experiments, Swiss lawyer and businessman Dr. Hans Scher.
There's absolutely no possibility that this film could have been prepared before, because I selected one of the video films which was in its original packaging, which I opened. I took the film out, I signed the film, and I put it personally in the video camera.
He inserted it into the camera. We never touched at any stage the camera or the film.
When we played the film, it showed at the beginning a number of bubbles of various colors.
But there was one particular bubble on there in which the face of a person appeared, and it was a man with spectacles.
Although Dr. Scher did not recognize this face, the Scole group thought it might have belonged to someone who was trying to communicate with him from the afterlife.
And we're going to jump now into yet another rabbit hole called EVP, or electronic voice phenomenon, which is very, very prevalent in a lot of cases of hauntings and those type of case files. So EVP is something that has been for a long time attempted to be standardized across a way of finding a machine that could actually interact with the spirit on the other side in a way that is not controversial and can be scientifically agreed upon. Well, what we're about to hear blows every device currently built by most paranormal researchers, and I mean this with all due respect because all the researchers have done a great job in the devices they built and almost made a science of it. We'll do another show on that entirely because it is worthy of its own show. But what we're about to hear is just, as with the Scole group already, absolutely out of this world and mind-boggling. Check it out.
One way that we also communicated with spirit, and which was a very effective way, was by use of an ordinary, very cheap tape recorder whose amplifiers were used by the spirit team to carry on a two-way conversation with us.
We inspected this machine and found it was completely normal. Earlier, its built-in microphone had been removed to eliminate the possibility of recording anything.
And the two reasons this is important is, of course, number one being the fact that it has no microphone to record, but number two being the fact that a lot of skeptics say that it's just randomly picking up radio and TV waves through the speaker, and that's what it is putting out. So that, or the microphone, is picking it up and is what's being put out. But this has eliminated all possibility of that being an option.
When the machine, which contained a blank cassette, was activated, witnesses were astonished when they heard this voice asking them a question.
Yes.
Experimenting with audio.
Yes.
Historic moment it is.
Though there's been evidence garnered since this time that has appeared to be just a little bit more clear, then that is debatable as far as the evidence and where it has come from in the latter years. But this is in the 90s, this experiment's going on. And for the 90s, I gotta say this is one of the most clear and amazing electronic voice phenomenon I had ever heard up to that point.
Spirit voices speaking through the mediums. Spirit communication written on sealed film in locked boxes. All these incredible phenomena. But could the scientists have been tricked?
Skeptics are often unaware of the amount of experience and the amount of knowledge that goes into investigations of this kind. Between the three investigators, you could say we'd had 50 years and more. We know all the tricks.
I don't see how it could be faked. It's impossible.
Nevertheless, was it possible for the Scole group to have perpetrated a massive hoax?
These things are so extraordinary that when one tells them to people who've not had the experiences themselves, they think, oh, it must be trickery. And the challenge then always is, okay, you duplicate it.
But so far, no one has been able to do this. Nevertheless, critics still claim that the events at Scole were produced by the kinds of conjuring tricks used by stage magicians and entertainers.
The dogmatic critics, might I add. But I love the fact that they mention entertainers and magicians because, as you know, here on the network we have a fellow radio host, Mr. AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, who happens to also be a professional magician. And Mr. Rabbit, of course, I have a lot of respect for, and I have a lot of respect for the magician's world in general because the illusionists are the ones that I really want in my corner. Because as a paranormal researcher, you see, I want to know if there's illusion or trickery being used. And these guys are the masters of knowing that these tricks or illusions are out there, knowing how to do this. And we brought this show around full circle because you remember the beginning, we mentioned Mr. Houdini and how he used to go into these seances and get these frauds for what they are and call them out and expose them. But now we are about to hear from a professional magician about the Scole experiment and his opinion on all the evidence that has been garnered.
You found them in this manner, like this, you see.
Because professional magicians learn all the skills of illusion and misdirection.
Genuine. I'm not going to show you how it's done, because if I showed you how it was done, you'd tell everybody else.
They are also well qualified to detect this type of fraud.
Hey, presto.
With that in mind, James Webster was invited to scrutinise a number of Scole sessions. Webster is a member of the Magic Circle in Britain and has been a professional magician for over 40 years.
Well, I had an opportunity to view the cellar. I could see no magic props or anything which made me feel inclined to think there was any hoaxing or trickery.
But could he replicate the events at Scole?
Okay, guys, so what do you think? Go ahead, place your bets now. One more time. Yes or no? Let me know. Do you think that the professional magician of over 40 years could replicate all the things that he's seen himself in the Scole experiment? Yes or no? Do you think it could be replicated by professional magicians and just done as so much as a stage show? Or do you think he's turned around and said, nope, this is absolutely authentic and there's no way I could do this at all? What do you guys think? Yes or no? Let's find out. 3, 2, 1.
I could not do it myself as a professional magician. And I don't believe in any magician that I knew could do even the lighting, let alone the other phenomena that I witnessed.
There you have it from the mouth of 40-year professional magician James Webster, who says he doesn't believe that any magician could even begin to do the lighting, let alone anything else that he's seen. And I'm going to have to ask Mr. AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit over there, if maybe he could, in all his years of experience, try to replicate some of this. I would love to know his answer. He's probably going to laugh at me and look at me like I've lost my mind, but, you know, we'll see. He is an amazing magician, I do have to say.
This particular experiment was perhaps the most important experiment of the whole series.
If you think we've covered the most amazing of all the evidence so far, this here is the one that really just blows everything else out of the water. This is the one that knocked my socks off when I first heard it. I can't even prepare you enough, guys. Get ready. Listen to this.
Previously, we showed how visitors reported seeing these balls of light appear before them.
It's like fireworks.
On this occasion, one of them flew inside a large quartz crystal.
The crystal then levitated, we could see it glowing, and then descended into a Pyrex bowl. Then Arthur Ellison was invited to pick it up.
Remember, Arthur Ellison was the electrical engineer skeptic during all of this from the Society of Psychical Research, or SPR.
He picked it up and satisfied himself that it was there and it was glowing, and he put it down again. He was asked right away to pick it up again. He tried to, and his fingers closed right over it.
That is to say that his hand went right through it, as if it wasn't even there, even though he had literally just picked it up and set it back down not even seconds prior.
It had dematerialized.
There's nothing there, yes, it looks the same, but there's nothing there.
Then he was asked to pick it up again, and it rematerialized in his hand.
Oh, I can feel the crystal now.
And once again, this is not a recreation. This is the real audio actually going on at the time of the experiment being done.
Now, this dumbfounded him. This is what finally convinced him that this was real, because it couldn't have been faked in any way. And he had his head right over the top of the bowl in order to ensure that no hand or no instrument could interfere with it.
Of course, we were totally amazed by this. Things do not materialize and dematerialize. This is against all the laws of nature. We are trained scientists, of course. We know how the world behaves, and it doesn't behave like that.
Whether you really think what we're experiencing now. Yes, it's amazing. Very cool, yes.
But what does this remarkable demonstration tell us about what might happen after death?
the spirit team told us that the experiment with the crystal in the bowl gave a good example of what happened when we die, in that the essence of the crystal remained even when the physical part of the crystal had been removed. Our bodies represent the physical part, but the essence of ourselves remains the same. This, if you like, can be termed the soul.
And that also is what I believe, is that the body is merely a vessel for the soul, and we come through the life many, many times, as we discussed in the reincarnation episode. And does this negate reincarnation? Absolutely not. That just means there's something in between here and there, or some of them just doesn't choose to return. It could mean many, many things, but that's speculation. But let's not get off track here. What became of all this? With all the scrutiny, all the skeptics, all the scientists involved, what was their final verdict?
In 1999, after an exhaustive 2-year investigation, the investigators published their conclusions in the SPR's official proceedings. They were looking for evidence of a hoax. They sifted evidence for signs of fakery. But did they find it?
If you take all the phenomena within the whole of the Scole experiment over 2 years while we were there, I would say that the possibility of fraud and faking was nil.
Although the Scole report includes theoretical discussions about how individual phenomena might have been faked, the chief investigators concluded that events at Scole cannot be explained either by known scientific laws or by trickery.
I think the skeptics regard the possibility of the survival of human consciousness as inherently so impossible that anyone must be rather crazy to believe it. But when you look at the evidence, you have to ask yourself whether you'd be even more crazy not to believe it, or to find some alternative explanation which makes any sort of sense. And I haven't found one.
That's got to be some of the most incredible evidence I've ever heard, is the fact that the skeptics' report came out very, very, very much in favor of no trickery being used whatsoever in any manner. Even though some things they said may have been tricked from some degree, they still couldn't prove how or replicate it in any way. But this happens not to be the end of the story, and we have gone over our time just a little bit, but it looks like the network execs are actually giving us the thumbs up at green light, so we're going to keep going. All right, so we've got a little bit more to present to you guys. This didn't happen to be the end of it. You see, the argument can still be made that it was all done in one place in Scole, England, right? And it's just happened in the cellar, so there just must be something about this that's still tied to the cellar that could cause maybe some trickery, right? Well, here's a little bit more evidence that actually shows that it was done more places than just in England. Listen to this.
News of the amazing events at Scole spread around the world. In 1997, they were invited to hold sessions in 4 European countries and the United States. Some of the most successful sessions occurred in the Los Angeles home of Brian Hurst.
We wanted to see whether it could also take place so many thousands of miles away from Scole, here in Southern California.
Hurst's converted garage was the venue for 8 sessions. As many as 30 people attended each one.
Oh, hi! Hello, Cynthia. Hi, nice to see you. Great.
Before each session, investigators carefully inspected the room.
Many people went in at different times before the sessions, and there was no paraphernalia. There was nothing hidden there at all.
Despite being interviewed a decade after the Scole experiment, these witnesses are still profoundly moved by what they saw.
There was so much phenomena going on. It was really overwhelming.
As with most sessions, visitors began by sitting quietly in total darkness. Then they started hearing the voices of the spirit team speaking through the mediums.
And so far it sounds like a complete replica and copy of everything we've heard from Scole, England. And this one is just even more amazing. I can't even begin to explain it, guys. Check it out.
Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Marie.
Then the darkened room burst into life.
Is that cool? Look at that. That is awesome. Wow.
It's like a firefly. Like fireworks. Wow.
And once again, this is not recreation of audio or footage, but this is the actual audio that was recorded at the actual time that the actual experiment was going on.
And then it would go up to the rafters of the garage and come down and thunk hard like a big rock hitting the table and then disappear.
And you remember Rupert Sheldrake originally explained this in the first part about how he thought when it thudded off the table that it was just an LED for it went through the table, but it also had physical form just as in this case.
As well as these amazing balls of light, furniture in the room began to move.
We had a table in the center of the room that had crystals on it.
It's moving.
The table is indeed levitating.
The table levitated, was turned on its side, and began to spin very rapidly. The crystals never fell off. Even if there hadn't been crystals on the table, it would have been impossible to have turned the table sideways and rotated it with the speed at which it rotated. And we could see this because there were luminescent strips on the table. And it began to spin around actually so rapidly it almost looked like a pinwheel.
So a heavy wooden table lifts itself into the air by itself, turns sideways, has crystals on it that are not glued to it, just laying there, along with Velcro strips that are glued to it, and then the whole thing starts spinning at a very, very, very high, rapid speed. And they cannot explain why, number one, the crystals didn't come off, but number two, how it could have even happened in the first place. If I were to see something like this, I don't even know how I would react.
As well as familiar spirit communicators, other voices the group say belong to dead relatives also attempted to communicate.
We're several
Someone for Shirley.
Yes? Sure, Dad?
Speak to him.
Hi, Dad.
I really do feel that my dad came and he was the one who put his hands on my shoulders.
Oh.
The way we were situated in the room, my chair was right up against a wall, and there was no way another person could be behind me.
Then another hand appeared in front of them. But who did it belong to?
There was a particular communicator called Reg Lawrence, who was an engineer in his lifetime and who became very expert at producing voices from midair.
So I want to clarify here, the guy he's speaking about is now on the spirit side, an engineer, so another person from the science realm or the science team on the spirit side who is communicating with the group in a way that is absolutely unique. And being that he was the engineer, I gotta say, it's quite fitting.
Hello, Red.
Hello, Brian. Very nice of you to have us here.
He just touched my hand.
Oh,
yes. He's stroking it. It's slightly cold, but it's flesh. He's shaking my hand. Oh, my God. Rex, you've made my ear.
You make mine.
Real audio of Reg speaking in the absolute darkness, right out of thin air, with having no ability or body, even though he was manifesting a hand in which the lady was actually shaking, and you heard his voice actually on the tape, a person who wasn't physically there, who was an engineer from the other side.
As usual, Lawrence did not communicate through the mediums. Instead, the group could hear his voice projected from different parts of the room.
Some of the voices were moving around the room, even high up in the rafter area, that somebody would have had to climb up on a ladder to get up there, and there's no way that was happening.
The spirit team also came to be regarded as healers by the participants.
Has it gone inside you, that light?
It's in my chest right now. It goes right there around my heart, and I have a little bit of a heart problem.
And you guys remember Robin Foy earlier saying that he was actually used as the guinea pig to try to perfect the ability for the lights to go into people and heal them. And it looks like that ability, thanks to his work and their work with the spirit team, did get perfected, as we're about to hear the most amazing story with the lights at the whole experiment.
I was diagnosed with cancer, and a very fast-moving, dangerous cancer. I sat with Scole, and probably 2 to 3 weeks later, I had biopsies again. and they came back completely negative.
And I am not a doctor by any means, but I can almost wholeheartedly tell you that that is impossible by the means and standards of medical science, because a fast-moving cancer, number one, doesn't disappear, number two, doesn't disappear within that short of an amount of time. So that is just, I mean, how do you explain that?
All of the visitors attending the LA session said the experience changed their lives forever.
When you walk out of that room, you definitely feel like you've been exposed to something very extraordinary.
We actually saw the spirits. And that's got to be positive evidence for survival.
We do live on after death. They certainly proved that to us that night.
And we do try to stay unbiased here and present things in a very unbiased and consistent way. But I have to say, there is another explanation that has been put forward, as much as I would like to believe in the soul and afterlife, and I still do, don't get me wrong. But to be fair, I must present all sides of an argument, and there is a very, very intriguing alternative option to explain the interactions and happenings at Scole, and here is the alternative explanation.
But some researchers think there may be another possible explanation. Could some of the remarkable events shown in this film be the result of human paranormal abilities like psychokinesis, the claimed ability of the mind to directly affect matter?
And since we're at this crossroads here of all these wonderful rabbit holes, let's jump down yet one last one. What do you guys say? Psychokinesis. Let's hear just a little bit about this explanation.
There's an enormous amount of evidence for the existence of psychokinesis. In the laboratory, we're talking mainly about the evidence of human consciousness on random number generators and very small events that can be totally controlled. There is clear evidence that people can affect things.
One of the most famous practitioners of psychokinesis, or PK, was a Russian housewife called Nina Kulagina. Kulagina was able to demonstrate her abilities under strictly controlled conditions in front of a team of scientists. Researchers who investigated her were convinced she was able to do this solely by the power of her mind. So could the Scole Group and their visitors unwittingly have created some or all of the phenomena using mind over matter?
As an explanation, although it's not more than just simply a label to it, this is psychokinesis in physical mediumship. Whether it is a spirit working through someone, a spirit acting directly on an object, or the medium's mind causing the things to move.
Say there were real mind over matter effects going on as opposed to conjuring tricks. Then how do we know they were coming from the minds of the disembodied people rather than from the minds of the mediums who were sitting in the room?
And this gets into a question that I've asked for a long time, and we'll get into this in future episodes about psychic abilities and things of that nature, but one of the questions that I have asked for a very long time is, when it comes to psychics, are they actually seeing the future, or are they manifesting the future with what they're thinking?
There is no definitive answer to this question. But the theory that these phenomena were due solely to psychokinesis from the living seems improbable, since PK produced in laboratories tends to be weak. Therefore, mind over matter from the living is unlikely to explain the huge range of phenomena.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Scole experiment. That's right, the Scole experiment. That is, as I said in the beginning, the most hands-down important experiment to ever be done within the realm of paranormal research, mainly because of the fact that the amount of scrutiny and the amount of scientists and researchers involved did their best and did in every way came up with ways to prove that this was by no way fakery, trickery, or any means whatsoever. And in tonight's final thoughts, this is the Scole experiment. This is the number one most important experiment to ever be done in paranormal research. And now I can definitely say beyond the shadow of a doubt in my mind that it is just that. And more paranormal researchers need to pick this up. We need a new generation of researchers. And I'm going to go ahead and put a call out now for anybody If you are interested in these topics, please, we need new researchers. We need people to pick this information up and keep going with it, to continue to get to the truth of things that they tell us cannot be, yet we know are very, very real. So what do you think? Is the Scole experiment real? Was it just the biggest hoax perpetrated on all of science and paranormal communities? Or was it just by chance the number one smoking gun for all of paranormal research? You be the judge. Oh, yeah. And that's it for us tonight, guys. But don't you worry. It's only the beginning of the weekend here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio. Can you guys believe it? We have clawed our way through yet another amazing episode. Usually we growl at the skeptics and howl at the truth, but the skeptics were a lot more on our side around here this time than we were used to. So we did howl about a lot of truth at the Scole experiment. Guys, I hope you've really, really enjoyed this. I sincerely do. But we do have to close the doors and turn out the lights. The weekend fun, though, has only just begun. The den may be closing, but the other rabbit holes are opening wide open. Remember, come back Thursday through Sunday and join our buddy AJ the Rippin' Rabbit as he digs down through the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show. And let me tell you, I know what he's got coming up this week. See, these big wolf ears tend to pick up the rabbits over there planning their stuff, and I happen to know, don't tell them that I told you, but I happen to know that Regina Meredith of Gaiam TV will be joining him for the first hour on Friday night. And who knows, he may even surprise us with a guest in the second hour. I couldn't quite hear what they were discussing at that point. They started whispering too low. But he did let me know that on Sunday, yours truly, the Dark Wolf, will be hanging out over there on the Rippin' Rabbit Hole live show, along with Miss Cynthia Sue Larson and Dale Dufay of Terras of the Milky Way. And you never know, we might have another surprise guest join us. You never know when you got this many people for the International Mandela Effect Conference, which starts on June 20th through the 26th. It's got 15 speakers, 6 days, one event you do not want to miss. And speaking of things that you do not want to miss, check out the rippinrabbithole.com. That is RIPONRABBITHOLE.com. Over there, you're going to find a lot of fun and interactive things like the Rabbit Hole section. That is our group section over there. Make sure you drop a line in the Darkwolf's Den Show group, or go on over to topics and suggestions for us and let us know what you would like us to talk about, because it's for you guys that we do these shows every week. We want to hear from you what you would like to hear from us. Guys, there's even more fun stuff on that side. If you go all the way to the bottom, there's a great big red button. Make sure you hit that button. You can record 30 seconds of audio. When you're done, it will automatically ship that audio to us right back here in the studio, and we'll get it on the air for you. I'm going to go over, guys, to my absolute favorite hangout. That is the 24/7 Backstage Lounge on the rippinrabbithole.com. Now, there's a couple ways you can go over there and join us. We have all kinds of interactive fun over there, so you can go to the 24/7 Backstage Lounge page, and when you get on there, there's going to be a chat window open, and below that, you're going to find the Enter Now to the Cam Live VIP chat. You do have to approve your microphone and video camera, but the moment you get in there, you can turn both of them off and speak to us only in the text chat. And I know some people who love to do just that. We have so much fun, you do not want to miss it, because the conversation might be done here, but for the Rippin' Rabbits, well, it's only just begun. And guys, I cannot wait to see every one of you over there here in just a couple minutes. I've got to finish up here, finish taking care of some stuff, and I'll be over there within moments. I am Jerry Hicks, also known as the Dark Wolf. This is Darkwolf's Den on Rippin' Common Sense Radio. And don't you forget, stay awake, but dare to dream. Don't you touch that dial. Howls!
Hello again, it's AJ, the Rippin' Rabbit. Give yourselves a round of applause for being smart enough to be here as Jerry has successfully kicked off the weekend with another excellent episode of the Darkwolf's Den Show. If you've enjoyed the program up to this point, please make sure to thumb up that video, hit that subscribe button, and ring that bell with notifications. You'll get our live notifications every time we go live, every Wednesday through Sunday nights, right here on the very best of Common Sense Radio, the Rippin' Rabbit Hole. All shows start at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. As an extended weekend continues, Thursday night I'll return with hidden attractions. That's right, very hidden attractions, waiting just perhaps to be rediscovered. Some of these places will inspire and surprise you, so make sure that you tune in tomorrow night, June 11th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then Friday night, we're going to have a special guest speaker. Regina Meredith will be here. She's the author of the book Accidentally on Purpose. She's also going to be the keynote speaker of the International Mandela Effect Conference. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic evening. That's Friday, June 12th, 2020, with Regina Meredith, Accidentally on Purpose, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then Saturday night, join us for Subliminal Stimuli. We're going to take a look at how it works. And can you spot hidden messages in our world today? Find out Saturday night, June 13th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central. Then we'll end out the weekend together with our friends from the International Mandela Effect Conference. More guest speakers will join us. Cynthia Sue Larson will be here with Jerry Hicks himself, along with Dale DeFay, to talk about the upcoming IMEC.world conference that starts June 20th and goes through June 26th. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's an IMEC Mandela weekend extravaganza for sure. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you jump on our mailing list. We made some changes today. That's why it went out a little bit later than usual. We were really trying to fix, the inbox penetration so that that particular email doesn't end up in your spam or junk mail folder. Our top hats off to last Sunday's Fantastic Fun King Queen. Nikki Rabbit took the throne. If you weren't there, boy, you missed out. It was a fantastic family game night. We'll do it again in July and see who will take the throne. I'm going to hop on over to the Rippin' Rabbit Hole VIP Lounge, catch up with Jerry. I've got questions. Boy, do I ever, and maybe you do too. So join us there at the Backstage 24/7 VIP Lounge at rippinrabbithole.com. That's RIPON, rabbithole.com. And if I don't see you there, I look forward to spending my weekend with you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Hicks, host of DarkWolf's Den, right here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio. And I want to talk to you today about an organization that means a lot to me and that I am proud to be a part of. We are called IMEC Incorporated, which stands for the International Mandela Effect Conference. We are a 501c3 organization run by a team of artists, authors, and visionaries who are extremely passionate about both the Mandela Effect phenomenon as well as the community surrounding it. IMEC is united in a mission to inspire, empower, and unify all curious observers. Through evidence presented by scientists, researchers, authors, and spiritual leaders around the world, we aim to educate the community on this incredible reality-changing event known as the Mandela Effect. Our 2020 event will be held online this year, June 20th to 26th, and will be available for absolutely free, both on our website at imec.world, as well as the International Mandela Effect Conference YouTube page. For more information, please visit imec.world. That is imec.world. IMEC.WORLD. Together we go, together we grow. Are you a YouTube creator that's tired of fighting over copyright issues for using the wrong music in your videos? Or perhaps a songwriter looking for something new? I know when I started DarkWolf's Den, I needed some original music, and for me, the answer was a no-brainer. I immediately called Tom Baillies of Red Shed Studios. Tom has been in the music industry for over 20 years and has a true passion for the art. So if you need a custom soundtrack for your next project, make sure you contact Tom Baillies at Red Shed Studios at 920-344-7634. That's 920-344-7634. Red Shed Studios. Don't you wish that your weekend was longer than just 2 days? Well, if so, then you're in luck, because here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio, our weekend begins on Wednesday. Yes, you heard that right. Our weekend kicks off every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, with DarkWolf's Den, starring yours truly, Jerry the Dark Wolf. But that's where the fun has only just begun. Make sure you come back every Thursday through Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, for the Rippin' Rabbit Hole Live Show, starring AJ the Rippin' Rabbit. He dives into the archives of vocal legend Art Bell and brings those stories up to date. So make sure that you spend your extended weekends with the animals of radio, Jerry the Dark Wolf and AJ the Rippin' Rabbit, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10/9 Central, every Wednesday through Sunday, right here on Rippin' Common Sense Radio.
Absolute beginners came to Georgetown. They were wearing Harris tweed and pork pie hats. They'd slit your throat and throw you in the gutter. But it's all you can expect from men like that. The bus is bound for Niles Bend Harbor. The ladies wear perfume to scar your nose. And the only way to reach them is to scare them. But of that you know little, I suppose. It's a magical and mystical performance as you perambulate right down the road, with your pockets full of stardust and perfection, and Jesus on your side and in your soul. She had rings on every finger and 10 bracelets, some touched with powers given by a sage. He had contemplated giving her his wristwatch. The time for him had long since gone its way. Of the city he would shuffle, while spinning on his heels and chewing beef. He had promised her he'd be a vegetarian, but he could not control his lust for meat. Some say she left the streets for greater glory, but others said that she was big with child. Whatever was the truth, it did not matter. He would hunt her down and cut her with his smile. Last time he was seen was by the pawn shop. He traded 2 gold teeth for a sack of corn, and he would plant it on the outskirts of the city as a warning that he would someday return. Said he never found her, he's still looking. It is said he searches rivers for some sign. But the truth is that he caught her down in Georgetown with a Spaniard who had left his wife behind.
Throughout the day. So just